In this Baldur's Gate 3 video, we'll be taking a look at the Druid class. The Druid class is focused around nature-based magic, shape-shifting, animals, and things like that. Druids can use light and medium armor as well as shields when it comes to armor proficiency. Druids also have quite a few less weapon proficiencies than other classes, with only a few simple weapons. So if you want to be able to use more weapons, you may want to consider making your Druid a specific race so you have access to more martial proficiencies. Like Clerics, they use wisdom for their spellcasting ability modifier, which means they'll need to get a lot of wisdom to cast spells effectively while in combat. At level 2, Druids get their Wild Shape class feature, which essentially allows shape-shifting into different animal forms, which is so cool. There are a lot of really awesome forms like turning into a spider, allowing you to jump very long distances. You can immobilize enemies with a web, which can also be shot from a very long distance away, or envenom them with a melee bite. You can turn into a giant badger and tunnel to a location, bursting out of the ground, taking enemies out of prone if they're in some sort of fortified position, or maybe even just navigate impassable terrain by burrowing under it, which is really cool. You can even shapeshift into a cat and use an ability called Distract. This is actually really useful in non-combat situations more so than combat, because you're actually very vulnerable as a cat. You only have like 5 HP or something like that. This Distract ability can be used to pull NPCs away from whatever they might be guarding, and they're actually going to pay attention to you, right? Because you're a cat and you're like meow at them. And then the rest of your party can go in and take the chest they were protecting, you know, pick their pockets, whatever it is. So the Druid actually has a lot of really flexible applications, you know, whether it's turning into a bear, turning into a cat, a spider, a wolf. It's all really cool. And of course, you can shapeshift outside of combat for all those non-combat situations. Also at level 2, Druids are able to choose their subclass, or what Baldur's Gate 3 calls their circle. Options include Circle of the Land, Circle of the Moon, and Circle of Spores, which is the new circle that actually wasn't included in the early access version of the game. The Circle of the Land subclass specializes in spellcasting. They gain a feature called Natural Recovery, which allows Druids to replenish spell slots while out of combat. This allows Druids to regain some of their spell slots per day and grants them the ability to cast more spells than the other 2 subclasses before they need to rest. So you can see this very much caters toward the sort of spellcasting Druid. Druids are also unique in that they get access to spells called circle spells, which are added to their spell list based on their connection to different types of the land. And you can choose which land you feel a mystical connection to, such as the Arctic, forests, deserts, swamps, or the Underdark, and so on. There's actually quite a few options. And depending on which land you choose, you're going to get access to different spells as you level up with this particular subclass. Now, an important feature of Druids and other classes like Cleric, Paladin, and Wizard, they need to prepare their spells before they can actually use them. You might have 8 spells, but you can only put 5 of them into prepared spell slots. So this makes you have to make some choices about which spells you want to have in those prepared spell slots. Now, the more wisdom you get, the more spell slots you'll have if you are a Cleric or a Druid. So wisdom controls your spell slots with those 2 classes. If you're a Wizard, it's going to be intelligence. But refocusing back on the Druid, the spells that you gain from the land of your choosing doesn't actually count towards your prepared spell count and are always going to be available to you. So this is sort of another advantage of choosing this sort of spellcasting circle of the land. Now, the other subclass, Circle of the Moon, has more of a focus on wild shapes, which is basically Baldur's Gate 3's shapeshifting. A great feature of this subclass is the bonus action you get to shapeshift. So you can use a wild shape and then immediately use another action in that same turn, which is really helpful when you're in combat. So for example, you're a human, you shapeshift into a spider, and then you go and you bite your enemy. You can do that all in one turn instead of, you know, if you were a Circle of the Land, you would just be able to shapeshift, and then you couldn't then use another action because you wouldn't get that bonus action to shapeshift like Circle of the Moon gets. Additionally, Circle of the Moon Druids will have more wild shape options, so this means you can shapeshift into more different types of animals than other subclasses. So they'll have more options such as a bear. If you really like shapeshifting and want to be using that most of the time, then Circle of the Moon subclass is the way to go for your Druid. And the last subclass, Circle of Spores, is a more, I would say, melee-oriented subclass with a feature called Halo of Spores. This surrounds you with spores that are harmless until you unleash them and a nearby enemy, which causes necrotic damage. And it can also increase your own melee damage. Now, if I were to sum up the 3 subclasses, it sounds to me like Circle of the Land is focused on improving your spellcasting ability, Circle of the Moon is for shapeshifting or wild shaping, and Circle of Spores for being a melee fighter that does not shapeshift. But Circle of Spores wasn't in early access, so I can't say for sure on that particular subclass. Druids are also really unique with their cantrips, which are spells that do not use any spell slots and can be cast at will. The spell Shillelagh, if I'm pronouncing that right, imbues your weapon to become magical and deal 1d8 plus 3 bludgeoning damage, but also uses your spellcasting ability for attack rolls. This is actually huge. So you don't need to worry about strength if you want to melee as a druid if you use Shillelagh. Instead, you can focus on using wisdom to improve your melee attack rolls when you have this spell on. And it lasts for 10 turns, so you don't have to use it over and over. Now, this is great because wisdom improves your spellcasting. It increases the number of prepared spell slots you have, and will then also increase your attack rolls when you imbue your weapon with Shillelagh, allowing you to really just focus on wisdom as a druid and maybe also constitution for more health. So you don't really have to worry about strength at all. And with all that said, I think the druid looks like a really fun and flexible class, and one that I'm absolutely considering playing as my class. If you guys like this Baldur's Gate 3 video, let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you want more like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.